Well, much of the mainstream media cycles last week were mired in chatter about UN Ambassador Susan Rice and the possibility she may be considered to take over as Secretary of State once Hillary Clinton leaves her post. And most of what you probably heard sounded something like this.
We are significantly troubled by many of the answers that we got and some that we didn't get.
Bottom line, I'm more disturbed now than I was before.
We will not allow a brilliant public servant's record to be mugged, to cut off her consideration to become Secretary of State.
I think the Republicans are making a big mistake. The first thing they do after the election is start attacking an African-American woman without any cause, by the way. This is somebody who had nothing to do with Benghazi. She was given CIA information. The CIA told her, here's what I think is appropriate to say.
Of course, it's only racism when it's directed toward a liberal or a Democrat. It's never racism toward a Republican. Look, if this was Condoleezza Rice and not Susan Rice, Alan would be on the other side of this camera, basically suggesting that she deserves to either resign or she did something wrong.
Well, as you can imagine, the Obama administration was a little annoyed about so much attention being paid to Ambassador Rice. I was at last Tuesday's press briefing at the White House, and question after question was about Susan Rice and who knew what when about the Benghazi attacks that took place. Well, here was one of White House spokesman Jay Carney's responses to those barrage of questions he got.
Can I just say, Chuck, that this is, again, what is the point of the focus on this? It could have been me. It could have been Ambassador Rice. I mean, I took questions on this too, and we all relied on information from the intelligence community. The focus on a Sunday show appearance is entirely misplaced, and it represents less interest, I think, in what happened in Benghazi than in political dynamics in Washington.
And you know what? He's right. The media is focused on the wrong thing. If they want to focus on Susan Rice, that's fine. But this overkill of her allegedly misleading the American people based on vague information she may have gotten might not be the most significant thing here. If they want to focus on the potential of her becoming Secretary of State and the issues stemming from that, let's look at who Susan Rice is and what she represents. Here's some food for thought. Susan Rice is worth between $23 and $43 million, making her the wealthiest member of the executive branch. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, she has investments in companies like TransCanada Corporation, Suncor, and Imperial Oil Limited. And that's just the beginning. Everything you see in yellow up here is something she has a stake in. And when you look closely, millions of dollars of assets in these Canadian utility companies and banks, which make up a third of her total investments. Now, if confirmed by the Senate as the Secretary of State, one of the first items on Rice's agenda would be to weigh in on and eventually make a decision about the Keystone pipeline. Now, this is just the beginning of some major concerns about Rice, and joining me to discuss this further is Michael Brooks, producer at The Majority Report. Hey there, Michael. What do you think is more important in determining whether Rice is a good candidate for Secretary of State? I mean, her so-called misspeak about Benghazi on the morning shows, or her financial holdings and relevant actions?
Well, definitely her financial holdings in TransCanada. And, you know, unfortunately, this is part of a pattern with the State Department and this issue in general. You know, you had lobbyists who were senior officials on Hillary Clinton's campaign lobbying her on the pipeline. Fortunately, you know, the pipeline was delayed by the administration, I think, due to the effort of activists on the ground. You know, and I think if we look at climate change as the security issue, it really is. You could, in some ways, see, you know, Rice's holdings in these companies as analogous to the Surgeon General, you know, having holdings in tobacco companies. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's something she should address.
And it's not just these investments. I know back in 1994, Susan Rice was working for the Clinton administration as a junior official for the National Security Council and helped to shape U.S. policy toward Central Africa during and after the Rwandan genocide, as Rwanda invaded neighboring countries to fight Hutus. Talk a little bit about some of the criticisms of Susan Rice, you know, in this.
Well, I think that Ambassador Rice in this regard is really just reflective of a lot of, even President Clinton himself and a lot of figures from that administration, because basically they were unresponsive to a genocide that, you know, took place in real time. It was clear what was happening, and due to other concerns about not wanting to get bogged down in Africa due to the Marines being killed in Mogadishu the year before in 1993, they didn't want to intervene. And this really horrific event happened. Now, the tendency coming out of that has been on the opposite extreme, which has been to look the other way as the Rwandan government under Paul Kagame has a questionable domestic record, although some real significant domestic successes, but also really plays kind of warlord and rebel politics across Central Africa. So I think, Ambassador Rice she kind of just embodies a lot of these tendencies of the Clinton administration and officials who were involved in both sides of both letting what happened in Rwanda happen and then probably going too far on the other extreme of being too forgiving of the Rwandan government.
It's so interesting to me because the position of Secretary of State is so important in terms of representing this country on an international scale. So why are we not hearing in the mainstream media about decisions like this, policy shaping ideas about Africa? This is not what we're hearing.
Well, because, these are more complex topics. They're a little bit, they're not in the news cycle, although obviously there's a lot happening in Congo right now that's relevant to this discussion, like you point out. But Benghazi is the Saturday or Sunday morning, argument topic right now, and it's partisan and it's easy to fit into sound bites, and people are scoring points, and it's easy to cover and easy to have people to come on and argue with each other about. It's not to say that what happened in Benghazi isn't really important and worthy of talking about. But her role in it was very limited. She read some talking points that were prepared for her. And as you say, it's really not in any way central to evaluating her record.
I think it's interesting what you said, Michael, that it's a little more complicated to talk about the issues in Africa, to talk about, but I think that investments and holdings in these major companies that you're going to have a role in making decisions on, I mean, this is, standard Washington, sports/politics. Well, why are people not talking about that?
Well, because again, from a partisan lens, it would be interesting to watch Republicans come out and say, we need to approve this pipeline immediately, but it's a major problem that she might potentially have a conflict of interest here. So a lot of these things, are driven just in this sort of partisan framework. And, real issues are kind of obscured by it. So I don't think that there's a political incentive for a lot of people to bring up her holdings because Democrats are going to want to be defending her. And Republicans are really strongly supportive of the pipeline.
I think that's such an interesting point, that because her, conflict of interest has to do with an issue that, Republicans would actually side with her on, something they would agree on, they're deciding not to bring it up. But what do you think? I mean, when weighing a potential Secretary of State, I mean, what qualities should be looked at, and how much significance should this be given? I know that in the presidential election, the conversation every single hour of every single day was about Mitt Romney's taxes. A lot of people were saying, you know what, I don't care how much money he makes. That's irrelevant. What do you think are the most important points that the American people should be thinking about, and that the American media should be talking about when it comes to whoever the next Secretary of State is?
Well, I mean, there's definitely some basic questions of someone's, intellect, their capacity. I think she definitely meets those marks. She's obviously a very talented person. She's a very accomplished person. There's been areas where she's been right about, like the invasion of Iraq. She was opposed to it from the beginning. And then, the other questions that are really central that I want to see her pressed on are Rwanda, her whole policy towards Africa. That's really where she launched her career from, as an Africa specialist. And I would say with regard to the holdings in TransCanada and other energy companies, she needs to let go of them if she wants to be a credible candidate. I think that that's a totally black or white thing. And I hope, you'll keep pushing on it and other people will keep pushing on it, because that's very clear. There's not much ambiguity there.
Let's talk a little bigger picture here, Michael, not just dealing with Susan Rice, but about something that you pressed upon, which is that this really is kind of, the political media these days seems to have taken a lot of notes from ESPN and the way they cover sports. And it's interesting to watch, it's fast moving, and people, at least, a lot of producers and on-air talent like to think that their viewers like it when it's more of, a sporting event. This he said, she said account. Talk a little bit about big picture here, how the media sort of does that, and what you think the impact has been.
Well, I think, there is an element to all of this of debate, of argument, and of entertainment, and that's fine to a degree. But I don't think it serves anybody to just constantly have a kind of very simplified and diluted debate. And it's funny, you mentioned ESPN, and everybody kind of says, well, we cover it like sports, but a lot of sports coverage is actually kind of more sophisticated. It'll be a lot more details about how teams are performing. There's kind of more empirical reference points. Some of the conversations are a lot more kind of civil and interesting and detailed. So I think it's very unhelpful, whether we're talking about the budget or whether we're talking about these types of issues. I think that specifically with regard to Benghazi, you had a really horrible event happen. And what it's really turned into is that basically Republicans are really terrified because President Obama has reverse the kind of poll numbers on who Americans trust with national security. So again, instead of having a broader discussion about national security, about all of these other issues you're raising, they're trying to score points and knock Obama down in terms of his standing on those issues through Rice. And, it's another just kind of Sunday morning argument, and it's not of really great service to anybody.
Well, as always with you, an interesting discussion. Michael Brooks, producer of The Majority Report. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you so much.